So today's daf is Kiddushin 64. We're going to start at the Mishnah on the top of 64a. Today's daf is dedicated for Yeshua, Hatzalah, Nechama, for Klal Yisrael, for the Shavuyim, for those who are in captivity, and for the Chayalim who are fighting, for all of Klal Yisrael. So the Mishnah tells us on the bottom of 64a, on the top of 64a, Kidash Yaspiti, if a man makes a claim, I betrothed my daughter, or he says, Kidashtia v'gerashtia, he says, I betrothed her and then I divorced her, Kashi Katana, when she was a minor. Va'rei Katana, now she's still a minor, so while she's a minor, he can marry her off. So she's still a minor, so Naaman, we're going to believe him. And the Gemara explains, why do we believe him? Because we say that it is still biyado. If he wants to, he has the ability. The Gemara's initial assumption is because he still has the ability to marry her off when he's a minor. So therefore, if she's still a minor, we believe him. I don't know if there's such a concept in American law. Since it's still in his power to do something, we believe him. But let's say he says, Kidashtia v'girashtia kashi katana. Let's say he says he betrothed her and he divorced her when she was a minor. Ta'arehi gedola. But now she's an adult. Eino neman. We're not going to believe him, because now he no longer has the ability to marry her off. And so therefore, we're not going to believe him when saying that he says, oh, I married her off. And now, therefore, why do we care if he says he divorced her? Because now she's prohibited to marry a Kohen. So we don't believe him because now she's an adult, so he wouldn't have the ability to marry her off at this point. So therefore, if he makes the claim at a point where it's too late for him to do that action, we don't believe him. Let's say he says, Nishbei Supidisa. Let's say he says she was captured, Rahman al-Sana. We read these lines today where there are over 100 Jews in captivity. And then she says, but I freed her, Pidisia, and so therefore, if that was a claim that she was captive, she'd be prohibited to marry a Kohen, because we're assuming that there's the likelihood that she was assaulted. So if he says she was captured and she was redeemed, so now he's making the claim that she was captured, therefore she can't marry a Kohen. We're not going to believe him. We're not going to believe him about that claim. And so therefore she's permitted to marry a Kohen. So the Gemara is going to get into the fact, why don't we believe him if he claims she was captured? But first the Gemara says, let's explain what I just said outside. Why in the first clause of the Mishnah where he says, I betrothed her when she was a minor, do we believe him? And why in the latter clause where we say, I betrothed her when she was an adult, do we not believe him? So the Gemara explains, Reisha biyade, the concept is in the first clause, it's in her ability to control it. Seifa biyade. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to shut the heat. It's a little too hot for me. Is that okay with you, Maya? Sure. Yeah. Okay. Show me where you're doing it.
It feels warmer than that.
What?
I said it feels warmer than that.
Because it was
just the blowing.
Yeah, that's right. It felt a little warmer. So it says, so the Gemara says the difference between the first clause and the second clause. And the first clause was in his ability to control it, and that's why we believe him. But in the Seifa, he can't marry off when she's over 12 and a half, and so therefore we don't believe him. The Gemara says, so wait, you mean to say he doesn't have the ability to say this case where she was captured and redeemed? Is that not in this case? Doesn't he have the ability to hand her over to idolaters? Why not? And doesn't he have the ability to disqualify her from marrying a Kohen? Below, Chalal was a person who was a Kohen, who was the offspring of somebody of a Kohen who's not allowed to marry somebody who married this person. That offspring becomes Mechulal, becomes desecrated from the Kahuna. So he, as a minor, he could have married her off to somebody who a Kohen's not allowed to marry. So the Gemara says, and thereby he would disqualify her. He could have married her off to a Chalal, and that would have disqualified her from being able to ever marry a Kohen. The Gemara says, hello, Kasha. That's not a difficulty. Rabbi Dustai, the author of our Mishnah, must be like Rabbi Dustai ben Yehuda, who says, Benos Yisrael mikvah tahara l'chalolin. that the daughters of Israel, they become like a purified mikvah tahara l'chalolin, that they become purified for chalolin. What does that mean? So Rashi explains that the author of our Mishnah must be Sfirle Latana Didan, the Amar Lakaman. The author of our Mishnah must hold, like that which we're going to say later on 77a. Benos Yisrael, the daughters of Israel are mikvah tahara l'chalolim. What does that mean? That they are pure, they become a pure mikvah for chalolim. The bas chalol zachar, let's say you have a chalol, and he has, meaning the Kohen, who's a person who's the offspring of, let's say, a Kohen and a divorcee, and he marries, and the bas chalol, and so his daughter, the bas chalol zachar, kasher l'kahuna, the daughter of this chalol, she can marry a Kohen. Shehishto tara as zaro, because his wife will purify his seed. So the Chalol's daughter can marry a Kohen. And so now we have another principle. Given the Bito Kshera, we have a principle that once his daughter is kosher to marry a Kohen, Almanaso Kshera. The Kohen, anybody who a Kohen can marry the girl, he also is able to marry her mother. The Kol Shatanose Bito Atanose Almanaso. If you ever can marry a girl, you can also marry her widow. So therefore, he doesn't have the ability to disqualify his minor daughter from the kahuna by marrying her to halal, because it doesn't disqualify. That's the point. Rabbi Dustai ben Yehuda says that if you marry your daughter off to halal, it doesn't disqualify her from marrying a Kohen. And so therefore, we see, going back to our case, that he doesn't have the ability to disqualify her from marrying a Kohen by marrying her to halal. So the Gemara says, yeah, but there's another way he could disqualify her. He could have married her off to a mamzer. So the Gemara says, no, the author of our Mishnah says he couldn't marry her to a mamzer. Rabbi Akiva, Damar in Kiddushin Tovsin. Rabbi Akiva says mamzer is somebody born from a union which the two parties involved get kares as a result of that union. Rabbi Akiva says if you try to marry a person to the offspring of that union, the marriage doesn't take effect. It's illegal and doesn't take effect. They're not married. So therefore, he couldn't have married her to do that, and so therefore, he can't disqualify her from the kahuna by having her in that relationship. So the Gemara says, yeah, but but he had the ability to marry her as a widow to the Kohen Gadol, which is another prohibited marriage. But like Rabbi Simai says, the Tanya Rabbi Simai taught, Rabbi Akiva would say every prohibition creates a mamzer chutz me'amana lekohen gadol, except for a widow to a kohen gadol. Sha'arei amar Torah lo yikach lo yichalel chilulim oseh ve'ein oseh mamzerim. That if you marry a widow to a kohen gadol, it creates chilulim but not a mamzerim. So the marriage takes effect. So therefore, we have a way to disqualify her to the kohen by marrying her to the kohen gadol, and thereby that disqualifies her. The Gemara says, no. The author of our Mishnah holds like Rabbi Yeshivav, who says that this marriage doesn't take effect, says, Akiva ben Yosef. Let's go scream at Akiva ben Yosef. This is already the second time in our tractate we had somebody screaming. And he's saying, let's scream about Akiva ben Yosef. Whoever says that it's a prohibited marriage, like the widow to the Kohen Gadol, the offspring is a mamzer, and therefore the marriage is not binding. And so we see from here that according to Rabbi Simai, the marriage will not take effect. According to Rabbi Yeshivav's explanation, the marriage will not take effect. According to Rabbi Yeshivav's explanation of Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, well, that only makes sense. If Rabbi Yeshivav is explaining his own understanding of Rabbi Akiva and saying that any prohibited relationship, according to Rabbi Akiva, doesn't take effect, then we would say that indeed he couldn't have created her to be disqualified to the Kohen by marrying her off in any way, because none of it would be binding. But but if you're just trying to say that Rabbi Simai is incorrect, because Rabbi Simai says a widow to a Kohen Gadol doesn't would take effect, and Rabbi Yeshivav says it wouldn't take effect. If that's all he's saying, well, there's another way he could have disqualified it. But according to then Rabbi Yeshivav could have said, there's another way to disqualify from marrying Kohen, which is not a prohibition, but a positive commandment, meaning to say that there's a obligation, that you're in violation of a positive commandment if you marry her off to a Mitzri or an Ammoni or a Moavi, Mitzri before the third generation, or an Ammoni or a Moavi, that these are positive commandments you're not allowed to do. So therefore, there are all these ways where you could have created it, even according to Rabbi Yashivav, according to his own explanation, by marrying her off to a Ammoni or Moavi. So therefore, he could have disqualified her from the kahuna. So therefore, the Gemara reanalyzes it. The Gemara goes back and it says, Rav Ashi, you think that the reason why in the first cause we believe him is because he has the ability to marry her off. He has the ability to marry her off as a minor, and so therefore it's in his control. No, he really doesn't have the ability to marry her off. Yeah, he has the ability to marry her off. But biyado lagarsha, he doesn't have the ability to divorce her. The husband has to agree to divorce her. Va'od, and furthermore, ilu amar hai, let's say the man, he doesn't even have the ability to betroth her, because let's say the man says, I don't want to marry her. The father can't force the man to marry her. So it's not really in his ability in the first clause. So if that's the case, why do we believe him in the first clause and not in the second and the third clause? So therefore the Gemara explains, in the first clause, the Torah believes the father when he says he married off his minor daughter and betrothed her when she was a minor. Why do we believe him under those circumstances? Like Rav Huna taught, how do we know that a father is believed to prohibit his daughter, biblically speaking? Because it says, as my daughter I gave to this man, meaning to say, when he says I gave her to a man, he prohibited her on every man in the Torah. But then he says I gave her to this man, hitira binisuin. So, but then we're saying the Torah is believed to say that he gave her to this specific man. The Torah believes her. So the Gemara explains how by it comes up to a marriage, the Torah believes the father. That to say is I married her to this and not to this one. That's why we believe him if she's a minor. But by a captive woman, we don't believe the father. And so therefore, Rav Ashi is saying the only way we know this is it's Xeris Hakosa. This is what the verse says, and that's why I believe the father in the case where he says he married off his minor daughter, but not in the case of a girl who was Rahman al captured. So now we go to the next Mishnah on the bottom of 64a. Misha Amar B'Shas Mitzah. So let's say a guy claims as he's about to die, Yesh li banim, I have children. Why would he make such a claim? Because if you have children, your wife doesn't have to fall to Yibum. He doesn't want his wife to fall to Yibum. So he says, oh, I have sons. I have children. Then Naaman, we believe him, and so therefore she doesn't fall to Yibum. But if he says the opposite, he says Yesh li achim, she thought he has no brothers and no children and no brothers, and therefore she doesn't fall to Yibum. But now he says, oh, I have brothers, so therefore you can't just marry anybody from the street. You have to marry one of my brothers or do chalitza with them. You have to do either Yibum or chalitza with one of my brothers. Eino Neman. We're not going to believe him under those circumstances. So if he says he has children and therefore she doesn't fall to Yibum, we believe him. But if he says he has brothers and therefore she has to do Yibum, we don't believe him. So the Gemara says, well, we see from here, Neman lahatir, Neman laasor. We see from here that we believe him to allow her to not do Yibum, but we don't believe him to prohibit her, to make her do Yibum. So the Gemara says, well, name of Masnisin to look Rabbi Nassan. Must be that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Nassan, because we have a brisa that says that Rabbi Nassan argues with this. The Tanya B'Shas Kiddushin, let's say at the time she's getting married, or time he's getting married, he says, Yesh lo banim. He says he has children at the time he's getting married. And B'Shas Misa, and the time he's dying, he says, Ein lo banim. He says, I have no children. So, B'Shas Kiddushin, Amar Ein lo achem, or when he's getting married, he says, I have no brothers, and therefore she doesn't have to do Yibum. B'Shas Misa, Amar Yesh lo achem. Then, and when he's about to die, he says he has brothers. So under those two cases, those two scenarios, Neman lahatir, we believe him to allow her to not do Yibum, meaning to say if he said he has no children, then before he's about to die, let's say, excuse me, when he's getting married, he says he has children. When he's about to die, he says he has no children. We don't believe him. But if he's saying when he's getting married, he has no brothers, and now when he's about to die, he says he has a brother, we don't believe him. So Ne'eman Lahatir, we believe him to allow her to not do Yibum, but we don't believe him to prohibit her unless she does Yibum. That's the position of Rebbe. Whereas Rabbi Nassan says, Af Ne'eman La'asar, we believe him when he says he has a brother. And we don't believe him when he says he has children. Meaning to say, we believe him when he reverses himself and he says he has no children, and we believe him when he reverses himself when he says the time of his death he has brothers. Whereas in our Mishnah it says that we don't believe him to prohibit, but we believe him to permit. So it seems like Rabbi Nassan is arguing with our Mishnah. So it says Rava Shani Asim. Now the case of the Mishnah is different. Given the Bishas Misa Kahadar, since at the time of his dying, that's where he reverses himself and says, "Oh, I had no. Before I said I had no brothers, but now I say I have a brother." Rabbi Nassan says we believe him. Why? Because he's reversing himself. He must be saying the truth. So Amar Abai, what are you talking about? That's very strange logic. We'll have called the Kenu. It should be the opposite. Just like over there in the case of the Brisa, where he said he had no brother, and now he says he has brothers. They come Marle Dibure, where he's basically impugning his previous words and saying I lied before. Amris Kushtaka Amar, we're saying he's saying the truth. Then Masnis, in the case of the Mishnah, he's not even impugning himself at all. He's just saying, I have brothers. Well, Kol Shekain, for sure, we should believe him. So therefore, Abai says, I don't like your logic. So therefore, Elam Arbaya Masnisin, what's the difference between the scenarios? Masnisin lo muchsakon ba'achi, lo muchsakon bevnei. In the case of the Mishnah, it's where there's no presumptive status that he has brothers and no presumptive status that he has children. The Amrina, and we say, since there's no presumptive status that he has sons or brothers, Amar Yeshli Banim, if he comes along and says, I have children, we're going to believe him because he has no presumptive status that he has anything. And so therefore we believe him to say that he has children. But Yeshli Achim, but if he says he has no brothers, Eino Neman, then if he says he has brothers, we're not going to believe him. Why? Lav kol kamine, because he doesn't have the ability to just make a claim and thereby prohibit her to the whole world. So we're not going to believe him in the case where he all of a sudden just jumps up and wants to undo the presumptive status by saying he has brothers, and therefore she has to do yibum. They say you can't prohibit her to the whole world by making this claim from out of nowhere. Brisa, but the case of the Brisa, why does Rabbi Nassan say we don't believe him there? The top of 64b. The Muchsaklan Ba'achiv or Muchsaklan Bevnei. In the Brisa, we know that he has brothers, but we don't know that he has sons. And so therefore in the Brisa, since we already know he has brothers, therefore, when he's going to come along now in the Brisa and say, what does the Brisa says? The case of the Brisa is where he says that he has children at the time of the time of death it says he has no children, so he's overdoing it and he's undoing it. And time of the time of the betrothal, he says he has brother. And time he dies, he says he has brothers. So there, back to the case on 64b. So what's the Brisa talking about? The Muchsakon Vachi, that we had a presumptive status that he had brothers. And so therefore, since we heard he had brothers, that prior to the Kiddushin, this man, prior to the betrothal, we had an assumption that he had brothers, and he didn't, and we didn't have the presumptive status that he had children. And so therefore, what's the presumptive status? She would have to do Yibum because she had no children and he had brothers. But nevertheless, if the husband says during the time of the betrothal that he has no brothers or that he has children and his wife shouldn't have to do Yibum, he would be believed if he wouldn't reverse himself at the time he's going to die. Because we say, Damrinan, Malil Sheker. He doesn't need to lie and say that he has no brothers or that he has children, because Maika Amar, let's say, what are you trying to say? That he wants to release her from Yibum, will lift her from Yibum. Matzi Amar, Patano Chabagita. He could always make a claim that he gave her a get. And so therefore, since we don't have to be concerned that he's lying, we can believe his claim that he has children, that he has no brothers, his wife is exempt from Yibum. But Rebbe says, not like Rebbe Nasa. So Rebbe, now we go to the case of the Brisa, in a situation where he reverses himself right before he dies, and he says his wife requires Yibum. That's where Rebbe Nasa and Rebbe are arguing. Rebbe Savar, Malil Shaker, Ki Edim Dami. That he says, why would I lie? I can always say, I gave her a divorce, is like the testimony of witnesses. How much credit do we give to that claim? The witnesses can come and uproot the chazaka, and so therefore, since after his initial claim, the presumptive status was that she was not falling to Yibum, his final words are able to uproot it because it's Malil Shaker. Why would he lie? Whereas Rabbi Nazan says, Malil Shaker, this claim, why would I lie, is just like a presumptive status. So therefore, since he already has a presumptive status, so another presumptive status can uproot an earlier presumptive status. And so therefore, he doesn't give such credence to this claim of why would I lie, or how I could have just given her a divorce. So now we're up to this case, the Mishnah on 64b. We already did this case back on 51. We did it 2 weeks ago. So I'm sure it's fresh in everybody's minds, but we'll just go through it again anyway. A man betroths his daughter. He says, I'm betrothing my daughter to you. But he has more than one daughter. So then, a man is allowed to marry off his minor daughter, but not his bogeres, not his adult daughter. So if he says, I betrothed my daughter to you, then we don't assume he's referring to the adult daughter because he can't betroth her. Let's say somebody has 2 sets of daughters, from 2 wives. He says, I betrothed my older daughter. But I don't know in Gedolah Shebegdolos if it's let's say Rachel has Reuven and Shimon, and Leah has Levi and Yehuda. I think girls. Rachel has girl A and girl B, and then Leah has girl C and girl D. And so I don't know if it refers to the older one of the older set, which is A out of Rachel's daughters, O Gedolah Shebektanos, or if it's C out of Leah's girls, O Ketana Shebekdos, or the younger one amongst the older daughters, i.e., number B, born to the older daughter. So therefore, under all these circumstances, She Gedom and Agados Shebektanos, Kulan Asuras, all those 3 are going to be prohibited because they could possibly be the older daughter. With the exception of the youngest girl of all, was the youngest one of the youngest relationship. That's the position of Rebbe Meir, whereas Rebbe Yossi says, Kuan Mutaros, they're all going to be permitted, with the exception of the oldest one of the older daughter, because she's for sure the older one. But let's say he says, and now we just have the opposite case. Kidash is biti akatana. Man says, I betrothed my minor daughter. Beini odem katana shebektanos, or katana shebekdos, or gdolos shebektanos. Sheri katana min akatana shebekdos. I don't know. He says, I betrothed my younger daughter. I don't know if this refers to girl D, or girl who's the youngest one of the youngest marriage, or girl B who's the youngest one of the older marriage, or girl C who's younger than B, even though she's the oldest of the younger marriage. Then Kulan Asuras, and all those 3 are going to be prohibited, except for the oldest girl of all. That's the position of Rebbe Meir. Rabbi Yossi says Kulan Mutaros, all of them are going to be permitted, with the exception of the minor one amongst the minor, the youngest one amongst the Rabbi Yossi would say in those circumstances, all of them would be permitted except for the youngest one of the youngest daughters, because she's for sure the younger one, and that's why Rabbi Yossi would say she's prohibited. So the Gemara says, you mean to say hakatanos bekwal? So let's say he says, I'm betrothing you to the he says, I'm being Mekadesh my daughter Stam, and we know for sure that he has the case here is that he betroths, we're saying it, he says, I'm betrothing my older, in the case where he has several daughters, and he betroths his daughter, and we don't know which ones are included. Ein habel gross b'klav. The Mishnah says the older one's not included. You mean the younger ones are included, but we don't know which one he's referring to. And you're going to say that it's possible that he's betrothed to all of them, and so therefore he can't be with any of them because it's possible he's betrothed to one of them. But we have a principle: Kiddushin shem Mr. Since these are sisters, he would never be able to consummate that marriage. So it's a betrothal that can never be consummated. And then we say Kiddushin shem Mr. So why don't we learn from here that even though it can't be consummated, we're going to say it's still a valid Kiddushin. And this was a dispute we had earlier, whether or not that is a valid Kiddushin, since you can never consummate that marriage because it's possible that you're being with the sister of your actual wife. So therefore, why don't we learn from here that even though the Kiddushin cannot be consummated, it's a valid betrothal? The Gemara says, no, no, there's only two girls here. One's an adult and one's a minor, and we're being told that the betrothal is to the minor, not to the adult. The Gemara says you can't say that. It says the adult daughters, that you have adult daughters and minor daughters. So therefore, it can't just be two. It says plural, adult daughters. The Gemara says, no, my bogros, what does it mean when it says bogros? Bogros to alma. It means to say, if you betroth your daughter, you don't specify which one, it refers not to adult daughters in general, but only to the minor daughters. The Gemara says, pshita. Well, that's obvious. Bogros may have a detail. He can't betroth the adult daughters. He's not capable. He only has the automatic power of attorney to betroth the younger daughters, but he doesn't have the right to betroth the older daughters. Says, no, we're talking about a case where the older daughter appointed him as agent. He might have said, he might have said when he receives the betrothal, it was adaito didak amakabel, that when he receives the betrothal, since she had appointed him as agent, and this guy gave him, let's say, $100, says, I'm betrothing your daughter. He said, I must have had his older daughter in mind because she had appointed him to be his agent. We say, as a general principle, a person is going to act in his best interest. A person is not going to abandon something which he gets benefit from and do something which he doesn't get benefit from, and that is and so therefore he's going to have betrothed his minor daughter because he gets to take the betrothal money from the minor daughter, but not the adult daughter. The Gemara says, but why? Milo Askinan, can't we say we're talking about a case to Amrele Kiddushe Lecha? She said, betroth me to a guy, and you get to keep the money. I feel Lachim Mar says, Inish mitzvah mitzvah. Since it's his real responsibility to marry off the younger daughter and not the older daughter, a person is not going to abandon a mitzvah which is upon him and do a mitzvah which is not upon him. And so therefore we assume that he would have betrothed his minor daughter and not the older daughter because it's his obligation to marry off his minor daughter. Even though we said earlier in the Gemara that it says you're not supposed to marry off your minor daughter, this Gemara seems to be in conflict with that. So then the Gemara says, why do we have the two cases in the Mishnah? One is where he marries off his older daughter, and we say it could possibly refer to 3 out of the 4, but not the youngest of the minor set. And then we have the case of where he says he's marrying off his minor daughter, his younger daughter, and it could refer to the 3 youngest, according to Rabbi Meir, but not the oldest. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says in each case it only refers to either the absolute youngest or the absolute oldest. So the Gemara says, why do we need to have both these cases by the oldest daughter and the younger daughter? Why do we need both these cases? The Gemara says, we need both. If we just have the case where he says he married off his older daughter and we don't know which one he's referring to, I would say, Rabbi Meir, therefore, Rabbi Meir says, in that case, that refers to the 3 out of the 4 oldest, to since there's somebody younger, so we call her older, since there's somebody younger than her. But in case of there was a minor ones, maybe we'll agree with Rabbi Yossi, the katana, in the case of the minor, because because everybody calls her the youngest daughter. The youngest one, everybody says, oh, you're the katana. And if we only have the case of the minor one, I would say, Rabbi Yossi. In that case, Rabbi Yossi says that you're the minor daughter. But in the case of the adult one, Rabbi Meir. Maybe I'll agree with Rabbi Meir that it's 3 out of the 4. It's Shricha. So the Gemara says, L'meimra, must be, we say from here, the Rabbi Meir is of the position, because Rabbi Meir says it could be the oldest daughter, or the oldest of the second set, or the youngest of the first set. It could be any of those cases. So it must be that Rabbi Meir says, Machas inish nafshe feka. Must say that Rabbi Meir says it's possible when somebody speaks, he puts himself into a position of doubt. And therefore, it could be 3 out of the 4 that he had in mind. Whereas Rabbi Yossi suffer, well, Machas inish nafshe feka. A person doesn't put himself into a doubt, and therefore it's either the absolute oldest in the first case or the absolute youngest. But Gemara says, well, but didn't we say the opposite in the Mishnah in Nidarim? At the end of Nidarim, didn't we say, we learn in Nidarim, I know they're at a Pesach, that if a person makes a vow that he's not going to get any benefit from this person until Pesach, he's prohibited to get any benefit until Pesach. But let's say his language is Achi Yehei Pesach. Let's say his language is until Pesach is over. Achi Yehei Pesach. That means Achi Yetze. That means his intent was until Pesach departs. But let's say he uses the language, and this is the ambiguous one, Ad Pnei Pesach, until the eve of Pesach. Rameir says Asar Achi Yageh. Rameir says it's prohibited until the first day of Pesach. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says Achi Yetzer. Rabbi Yossi says no, it's a case of ambiguity, so we have to assume it could even be referring to the last day of Pesach. So it's prohibited up until the last day. So we see from here that Rameir says he puts himself not into doubt, or Rabbi Yossi says he does put himself into doubt. So it's the opposite positions of what they say here. Okay, yeah, we say that the positions became switched, and so switch what Rabbi Meir's position is with Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Meir says up until the last day of Pesach. Rabbi Yossi says up until the beginning of Pesach. Gemara says, and we have a brayso that supports that. Vatanya, and here this is Vatanya ben Yichusa. Rashi says normally Vatanya is coming to ask a question, but here Vatanya is coming to support what we just said. Zeklal kol shezmano kavua. Anytime where you have a fixed time and you say ad penei, Rabbi Meir says ad sheyetze. Rabbi Yossi says ad sheyagia. Anytime you have the words, you have a fixed time, and you say until the eve of, Rabbi Meir says it means until the departure, because Rabbi Meir is saying that a person puts himself into doubt, so we have to worry about all the scenarios. And Rabbi Yossi says until the arrival of, because he says you don't put yourself into doubt. Okay, we'll stop the recording here. We have upstairs now. We're going to daven Rosh Chodesh.